thank you to all four of you for incredibly moving recollections, reflections, and analyses. We really appreciate that. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes on some comments, and then we'll open for discussion. And I begin with a confession. There have been several people who've said that they were not familiar with the term humanitarianism. And I confess that when I first spoke with Father Nathaniel and we were discussing this conference, he too asked me what I meant by humanitarianism. And I explained to Father Nathaniel that humanitarianism is a term of art, I suppose, far from art as we know, but a term that's used by the international policy community. It's certainly a term that's used by governments. It's a term that's used by multilateral organizations to do what everyone here has been talking about, and that is to provide for the basic human needs of people in a variety of contexts, in a variety of national and local settings, and with different degrees of intensity. But that it's a term that is out there, and we all know what we're doing when we're trying to respond, create the relationships, build the relationships, sustain the relationality that you emphasize, Pascali, in providing for people's basic human needs, in respecting their dignity, and in helping them literally in many cases to survive. And one of the things that's been striking about yesterday's discussion and today's discussion is the fact that we still are dealing a bit with terms, and how we conceptualize, how we define, how we speak about this practice, these practices that constitute responding to basic human needs, I think is something that's very important. For Orthodox Christians, yesterday we heard a lot about how Orthodoxy thinks about humanitarianism and how we might define it. I think that if Orthodoxy is interested in changing the language, or certainly changing the content and the insights and the consequences of that language, that's part of this colloquium. We need to have a voice and be part of the discussion. At the same time, I think it's also imperative, and this certainly came through, I think, Joyce, brilliantly in your remarks, we need to recognize that it's not only Orthodox Christians who are problematizing over this issue, that this is an issue and a question that cuts across faith, non-faith boundaries. It cuts across boundaries of religious belief, non-religious belief, and it certainly cuts across confessional and sectarian lines. And I think that is one of the really important takeaways from us thus far, and I think all of you beautifully highlighted that this morning. The second point I think that bears emphasis for us and came out again brilliantly in all of your presentations is the question of time and how we conceive of time when it comes to this practice of humanitarianism and the associated question of what is crisis. And there are two ways I think that we've been talking about time and crisis. One is, again, the language that I'm very familiar with as an international relations scholar and as a practitioner, and that's the language that we read about in the media every day. When we think about time and we think about humanitarian responses to crisis, we're generally talking about weak or fragile states. We're talking about the collapse of states. We're talking about violence and war. We're talking about sub-state or cross-border conflict, and we're talking about usually short-term emergency conditions. But I think all of you have beautifully illustrated, and yesterday's speakers as well, that there's another way to think about time when we're speaking about humanitarianism. And that's according to an eschatological time clock, which means that there really is no end point, and that the practice of humanitarianism, of responding to basic human needs, may indeed have an emergent quality to it. We fall, we break our leg, we need, to have emergency, immediate medical treatment. So there's an immediacy. But there's also a sense of life's work and the endlessness and the constancy of humanitarian work. And I think yesterday's connections between ecclesiology and societal transformation and the work that you all do, that you talked about today, underscores the need for us to recognize that humanitarianism isn't simply emergent. It's not simply in the space of a crisis, because after all, isn't the fall the crisis? And aren't we constantly trying through the process of moving forward, coming closer to God? Aren't we constantly engaged in what you're all talking about? Responding to the basic needs of humanity, and in that respect, emboldening, enlivening, and sustaining the image and likeness in each and every one of us. So I think the timeline is important, and that's again where faith and non-faith conversations can be very important. And then finally, well, third, and then I have a fourth point. The third point, I think that all of you underscore very beautifully, is the fact that there is a constant process of learning that must accompany how we think about humanitarianism and how we practice it. And I think the learning, as you all said, occurs in multiple spaces, in formal educational environments, and I think certainly for Orthodox Christians that's something we need to think about with far greater systematicity and far greater dedication. This came up yesterday. How is it that we can learn about how to think about what humanitarianism is and also to practice it? And then in the space of what we're doing, as you, again, all of you beautifully pointed out, that we're literally learning as we're doing. And I think, again, keeping that in the foreground of our imagination is important. And then finally, a comment that I must come back to. That's Joyce's comment, and I wrote this down so that I would get your quote right, that the focus on religious leaders marginalizes women. And I think that that's something that is that we must attend to. The language and the practices that go along with this terminology of religious leaders, yes, my friends, marginalize women. And yes, it's wonderful to be, to realize that as women, we're all part of the humanitarian exercise, but it's also important to recognize that categories of language exclude or include. They create power or they dispense with power. And I always think about the Trinity as the most beautiful example of the erasure of power. There is no power in the example of the Holy Trinity. There's no hierarchy of order. There's this brilliant synergy that erases power. And I think we need to be aware of this point that you made, that the focus on leaders means that there are leaders and followers, that there are those who decide and those who don't decide. And I think that issue in and of itself, if we're not aware of it, it corrodes and erodes the possibilities of the work that all of us seek to do in our various spaces where hopefully we're dedicated to humanitarianism. And I could probably bore all of you to death with anecdotes about rendering more specific this point, but I'll save that for the break. But I think that many of us in this room, that comment resonates very beautifully. And I think it's also extremely important because women are oftentimes the most vulnerable in the kinds of contexts that all of you deal with. Women are part of these exceptionally vulnerable elements of society. And the vulnerability of women has implications for the cohesiveness and sustainability of families and for broader forms of social cohesion, dialogue, conversation, and ultimately the kind of transformation that amplifies our humanity and brings us closer to God that all of us are here committed to talking about. So thank you. These are my observations, and now the floor is open to questions for the speakers.
Thank you very much to all of you. Incredible presentations, incredible analysis, Elizabeth. And I don't know where to start, and I just won't be everywhere. I'll try to focus on something that caught my attention. Pascali, in your presentation at the very end, you mentioned that when we are asked to help our neighbor, kind of people know how to do it. People respond, right? So when you went to this community, you said, I'm here to help, to prepare for a catastrophe. Are you prepared to help your neighbor? And it was great. The community responded in the way that they did. And I was thinking of kind of the parable of the Good Samaritan. And, fortunately, there was that Good Samaritan that came along the way and stopped and saw in that person on the road Christ. But there were two others that came along and kind of ignored, or as the scriptures say, they crossed to the other side. And I'm wondering, everyone here today and yesterday, and I'm sure later today, spoke about successful kind of efforts to bring aid and to work with people, to build bridges, to see, God in the other. I wonder how do you respond, or can someone just speak about kind of failures to respond to this call for helping your neighbor, crossing to the other side? When reaching out to people, how do we deal with, our communities that kind of would have said to you, hey, I'm busy getting ready for the festival, maybe go down to the Baptists or to those people over there that actually do this type of work, or to the other Orthodox church, go to the converts that do this type of thing. Because I think it's great to talk about successes, but I think we have to learn from our failures too, and I haven't heard much from anyone about kind of, I heard about the struggles, the fears, getting beat up by the members of that community, the village and stuff, but how about failures? How about kind of, how do we pick up our head and keep walking?
Well, I'm certain that if you grade us on how vast our resources are as a faith community to how much we provide for humanitarian, I don't know how we'd compare to other faith groups, other secular groups. I can't speak to that. What I can say is, if you're a parish administrator, whether a priest or parish council, and you're trying to get volunteers to bake something for your summer sale, or you're trying to get volunteers for parish council to run the accounting budgets and file paperwork, that's not easy. But for me it's easy. I come in and I'm like, okay, who wants to go make the world a better place? And everyone's like, yeah. It's just an easy job because people want to help out. The natural inclination of everybody is, oh my gosh, look at this my neighbor, this person that I see right next to me is in need. And I have means to assist them to make their life better. Of course I'm going to help out.
Two of our peacemakers who worked in the Galilee, Osnat and Najiba, a Muslim, an Arab Muslim Israeli principal and a Jewish principal of elementary schools, created work together. Their schools were maybe 15 minutes, maybe less apart. But one was in a very urban setting in a very suburban elementary school. The other was in an Arab village and had been renovated, but was not at all like the other school. And they found each other and decided that their kids needed to know one another. And they created something they called the project. And they became sisters in every real way. And for 8 years, they did the project where their kids would be bused to be with each other, and they would do projects together so that they would know one another and not live in their same neighborhood, essentially, not knowing the other. And they learned about each other's traditions. They engaged the parents. It was a long project. Osnat got ill. She had cancer. And Najiba was with her and her family when she died, and one of the last things she said was, Najiba, keep the project going. And Osnat's assistant who had been very much part and parcel of the project, took over the school, and it became hard to reach, and Najiba had trouble reaching her in order to continue the planning. And finally, Najiba, something got set up, and they had a bus, and Najiba's kids came to the Jewish elementary school. And the kids who had been playing together for years started calling them names and yelling at them. And she left in tears, and the project ended with Osnat's death. Now, Najiba kept going and has created a new project, having found one of the educators with whom she'd worked with Osnat, who became a principal in another school and was moved and created it. But that was a failure. And so not everybody wants to help their neighbor, and not everybody, I think, shares the vision. And I think it's really very hard work. And I think there are lots of failures. You could call Bill Lowry's work in South Sudan a failure, or you could say he had a period of success, or a moment where people were not at least, I don't think peace is the absence of war, but there was a period of time where there was an absence of war, where people had hurt each other. And that's why this work is so hard and so long-term, and needs to be understood as a vocational option that needs support. Because otherwise, it's very hard to get it done.
Yes, I'd like to add something in relation to what Ms. Dubinsky and Dr. Prodromo mentioned. That is what I could not include into my speech because I didn't want to impose with so much time talking. But it's an example of what women are doing actually in Kosovo and Metohija today in humanitarian efforts to help those who are in need. I would particularly like to mention one extraordinary woman, Presbytera Svetlana Stevic. Svetlana means Fotini in Greek, and she's a mother of 4 children. She's a very good mother, and her husband, the priest, local priest in northern Kosovo. But actually she came to the idea that she just cannot sit at home and take care of the children and cook, but she felt the need that she had to do something. And she came to the idea to open the soup kitchens for the needy people, because we have many elderly people who live in isolated villages who would simply be starved to death if there would be no one to help them. And she began organizing soup kitchens, and now after almost 10 years of her work, we have 6 soup kitchens that are daily providing food for 2,000 people, mostly elderly and very poor people who cannot themselves come to the soup kitchens, but the food is transported to them by cars. She organized everything. I mean, I was joking with her. I said, well, if women ever become bishops in Orthodox Church, you will probably be the first candidate. she was very flattered, and because she gave an example, actually, how individual initiative is so important. Because no one actually told her to do that. No one gave her the blessing. There was no some special spiritual father who would tell her, oh yes, God wants you to do this or that. Simply, she felt as a Christian woman, I have to do something. And she did it. And to run 6 soup kitchens in Kosovo, where the sources are so few and where it's very hard to provide food, it's extremely difficult. But she manages to get donations and find some people of goodwill, sometimes people who belong to different ideological blocks, and also she involved football fans from Belgrade, some representatives of some media, also American Embassy helped as well, because the idea is now to create these soup kitchens more economically sustainable, so that we can provide one part of the food ourselves. So actually she opened a goat farm to make cheese, and also our Bishop Theodosia, who is helping her, but she's doing everything herself with her team, which she gathered around her. Actually, we provided them with one piece of land, so now they're growing vegetables and providing some food, making their own bread as well. So it's an amazing example how actually when we really feel the need to help the others, reading the gospel, trying to follow the path of our Lord, we can do so many things. And women really can be in the first ranks of that. We must never, of course, forget that when Christ was crucified, the apostles, except John, all ran away. It was women who remained at the cross there, and which shows actually that women have a very and crucial importance in our church, and of course in their own way, and they can very much contribute to our mission and to our humanitarian efforts. I wanted to share this example with you simply because I feel a special obligation to mention the name of this wonderful woman, Svetlana Stevic. Thank you.
I'm actually a storyteller, so I feel much more comfortable now rather than reading a formal paper. Sometimes failure can actually be a relative term, and I'd like to share a perspective between World Vision and the Georgian Orthodox Church. And so for those in the audience, keep one foot in the 21st century America and the other foot in your Orthodox world, and you'll see the conflict. I was working with a young abbess in Tbilisi. She was actually one of the first Georgians I met, and she helped invite me to come overseas. Her name is Mother Mariam, and she was a scientist. She was graduating university just as the Soviet Union collapsed, and she fell in love with the church. And she became a monastic, and she became an abbess in the inner city in Tbilisi, which is about 1.5 million. And she's very close to Patriarch Ilya, and she is sort of the image of social action in Tbilisi. Patriarch Ilya, she wanted to just go to the monastery and pray, and Patriarch Ilya says, we don't have time for that. So there's work to be done. And she was given charge of all the street children, all of them. Her convent was just opened. And she said, Father Theodore, you can't imagine. We had little thieves running all over the place here. They were taking everything. And what she did was she began to organize fundraising with a few Georgians here in America. And she started buying out an entire village just outside of Tbilisi. You could buy homes for like $3,000 and $4,000. Not much, but it keeps the rain off and keeps the warmth in the winter. And she was buying up this village. She arranged with Patriarch Ilya to assign 2 and 3 priests. She started recruiting young college graduates. There was no work anyway, so she was recruiting them to be teachers. And she built an entire village of orphan children that she taught them. And so when I was working with World Vision, they were saying, oh, we work with women and children at risk, and we want to help. And so I said, let's get together. And I said, you really need to speak with Mother Mariam. And so I met with the wife of the UN ambassador from Tbilisi, and she was working with World Vision, and she said, I'd love to meet Mother Mariam. So I arranged, and they went, and they had like tea for 2 or 3 hours together, and just had a nice conversation. And I talked to Mother Mariam afterwards. She said, oh, she's a very nice lady. And that was it. I didn't hear anything more. 2 months later, on the World Vision page, I see that they have a new organization. It helps single mothers, unmarried mothers in Georgia, give birth to their children. They can come 1 month before the baby is due, and they can stay for 3 months. That's it. During that time, they educate them safe sex, and they educate them in AIDS prevention and all this sort of thing. Now, this is a single unwed mother in Georgia. She's already been kicked out of her village because she's expecting a baby and she's not married. Now we're creating a woman who's even more alien to her culture. Where does she go after, because she can only stay for a few months. Where does she go? To Mother Mariam. That's the only place she can go. And so we lost an opportunity there to actually build this relationship that could have gone. I mean, I'm guessing that the organization she built, they could handle 12 women in a year, on the order of $500,000. If Mother Mariam had half that, she could have worked miracles. You know, in the end, what she did was she just did what she was doing anyway, and she recruited a number of registered nurses from Europe and from America, and they created a training center at her convent. And so these single unwed mothers were trained to become nurses, so they could support themselves and they could support their babies. So now let's look at it on the World Vision side. This is a running operation. You know, it looks really good on your portfolio. They're taking care of, you know, unwed mothers. And so this is something we can show donors back in America, and it looks really, really good. But we haven't solved anything. You know, we haven't really addressed any problems, and we've channeled resources in a way that is almost a waste. So the idea of failure, I think it's a relative term, and we need to take a close look at that sometime too.
Hello. Hello. I apologize if this question is redundant to yesterday's topics. I was unable to attend yesterday. So, Father Saba, when you were talking, I heard you have this theme of the distinct difference between politics and humanitarianism, that choosing sides is not really what we're called to do, that we're just called to, I think you said, side with those in need. My question for all of you is, having dealt with these problems, humanitarianism internationally, how do you overcome what is very clearly a mixed bag of politics, diplomacy, and humanitarianism, in that many countries tie themselves to religious beliefs, and so separating the country from the religion that is popular there from humanitarianism is very difficult, I would imagine. What are some of the struggles that you're seeing that are most important in getting over that hurdle and getting the help to the people that it needs to get to?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I very strongly think after these 15 years of experience after the civil war in Kosovo, and that it's very important to separate the work of the church as much as possible from secular authorities. I think then we can be more church, and we can more feel the needs of other people, regardless of their origin, regardless of their religion, and that is exactly what that is exactly the best way how to achieve reconciliation between the communities that very often wrongly see religion as a source of the conflict. We are constantly repeating that this was not a religious conflict. Essentially, I mean, religion was misused, and very often by people who had nothing to do with religion, and took a religion as a banner of their ideology. And for us Orthodox Christians, and for everybody who is working in the humanitarian and religious field, it's so important to try to avoid taking these sides in such a way, because then also this will narrow our space for the humanitarian work. So our humanitarian work with a Kosovo Albanian community is something that has given us, okay, we didn't do it in order to get some particular respect by them. Unfortunately, still many of the people we helped feel intimidated to visit us and to establish closer contact with us, because some who are more radical are saying, oh, you were receiving help from a Serbian Orthodox monastery, you were not patriotic enough. On the other hand, we are facing problems also on our side. We have also some people who are saying, okay, come on, you're a Serbian Orthodox monastery, you should take care of your own community, forget about others. So that's why my constant idea we have, and thank God we have very strong support of our bishop, who was the abbot of Deceni Monastery before me for 19 years, and I was his deputy. We were working together. It's been always the idea to see other people really as those who are called to be our eternal brothers in the heavenly kingdom. And that is the guiding line. And this is the most important aspect for our humanitarian work, because we are not doing that only because we feel emotionally struck by somebody's suffering. We see this also as a way of serving God, and also as a mission. Not mission in the sense of we want to convert somebody. We were not helping others in order to make them necessarily Orthodox Christian. Although we have some people who accepted Orthodox Christianity, as His Eminence explained yesterday wonderfully. I mean, working with other religions is actually a way how we are witnessing Christ, not by forcing others to accept what we believe, but actually showing the loving heart. This is, I think, the best way of mission, and first of all, of witnessing who we really are. So that's I think so important for us. And doing things on the political level. Fortunately, sometimes we have to speak in a political way because we have this component of the political component of the conflict there. But we are trying always to make a kind of balance, because I always ask myself, okay, if I were born Kosovo Albanian, you know, what I would think. So we have to understand the people who suffered. We heard from Father Luke Veronis about what the Orthodox Church in Albania did for the suffering Kosovo Albanians, many of whom had to leave their homes. We know that so much. And we ourselves, as I said, received a group of them at our monastery. That's probably, I'm always sorry that we couldn't do more. But it's good for them to see that the Orthodox Church is not actually the church of Serbs, Greeks, Albanians, Russians, or others, but this is actually, we are the members of this church, and actually the Orthodox Church is helping us to formulate our identity, which is essentially based on our Orthodox Christian belief. And that is the approach I believe it's very essential for the Orthodox Church today in the world, where we have so many conflicts and where we have so much to do. Thank you.
If I may just, when I was working between the Georgian Orthodox Church and World Vision International in particular, but a few others, though it was very important they were the ones who came to us. And there were several times I would have to remind them, you came to us, that we were actually doing our work anyway. And so what that did was it kept the politics out of it. If they wanted to help us, that was fine. But they couldn't dictate policy to us. The Georgian Church has been established for 1,500 years. You know, it's dealt with this sort of thing before. And so actually what Metropolitan Nicholas and Patriarch Ilya felt is that we can help them become part of our work, but it has to be on our terms. You know, we're taking care of our people in the way that we know how. If you'd like to assist us, then please, welcome. We need the help. But when it came to compromises, and they tried a couple of times, then we just had to draw the line in the sand and say, you know, we're sorry.
Thank you. I'm glad you made that comment, because you know, my comment and my question is about the reactive nature that we've heard. You know, we've heard a lot about response. We've heard some fantastic responses. The Orthodox Church has responded very well, but it always does seem, you know, like we're responding almost after the fact. We heard Father Sava said that he was in Kosovo and very aware of the ethnic tensions back in 1991, seeing these things. Father, you were in Georgia with a lot of fantastic programs, but when USAID and these other agencies came in, they came to the Orthodox Church, and you know, secondary or tertiary, it wasn't a real preparation. So while we've heard a lot about response, I'd like to ask a question about the other side of humanitarianism, which is awareness, mitigation, and preparation. And should the Orthodox Church and should Orthodox organizations take a more proactive rather than reactive stance? I work for Focus North America, the domestic social, an Orthodox faith-based domestic social service organization that works on homelessness. And I was recently with the national CEO of Catholic Charities, obviously a very, very large charitable organization, and we were talking, and he said to me, very sincerely, he said, yeah, okay, so I've heard about IOCC, and now we see more recently Focus coming out. He said, in the Orthodox Church, are you having some sort of charismatic movement, that's driving this sort of, social outreach and response? So there is a great, let's say, lack of awareness or lack of understanding that this is, very much a natural part of Orthodox theology, and Orthodox people are desire to be involved in humanitarianism. And we see a lot of forward motion, like Mr. Paporis's position in IOCC, being very actively engaged in the government, like the good work that Father Nathaniel and Nick Anton are doing with internships at the United Nations. So should the Orthodox be in a more proactive stance to make our positions and our work known? And how do we do that? How, as Orthodox scholars and practitioners, how do we say the Orthodox Church is involved and we are doing this sorts of work and you should know about it in advance?
Nick, very good question. Living in a context where Orthodox Christianity is a minority, like let's say, the Holy Land, Jordan, maybe up to 2%, right, of the population. Nevertheless, that 2% has such a central significance to that social milieu. It historically, it's everywhere. You can't look anywhere in Israel, Palestine, Jordan, without sensing that the Orthodox Church belongs here. In America, where, depending on how you count statistics, Father, it may be up to 2% of the population, again, depending on how you measure those, but nobody really knows who we are. And we haven't been terribly good at informing people, letting people know that, oh, by the way, we exist. We're a footnote in statistics. We're other faith. A good example, I remember one response activity was tornadoes in Alabama, and reached out to a local community of evangelical community, but unaffiliated with any large denomination. They were doing some really good work, and introduced ourselves, International Orthodox Christian Charities. Now, in America, when somebody thinks Orthodox, the first thing that comes to their mind is Orthodox Jewish, right? So she's kind of looking at me, and she said, now, Orthodox Jewish, or Orthodox Christian, she said, doesn't really kind of make sense. She's like, are you all like Jews for Jesus? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, we were established by 12 Jewish guys. And she didn't get it. She goes, wow, that's great. So I mean, but in the process of, nobody's going to know about who we are, that we exist, that we do anything, if we don't take the light from under the bushel and put that light shining on the street corners where there are needs, where there are drug addictions, where there are homeless people, where there is violence, when there is anger and persecution. That's where we need to be. It's not enough to have the light under the bushel, which is each of our churches, liturgy on a Sunday, and that's it. We are obligated to go out there and show that our faith through our works.
Could I respond to that as well? I think you raise a very critical question in terms of the kind of work that Orthodox Christians can do, but also in terms of reflecting on the condition of being Orthodox. I'll put it that way. I served for 8 years on the United States Commission for International Religious Freedom. That's an independent U.S. government agency, and we report to reported to Congress, Secretary of State in the White House on religious freedom violations around the world. It was an extraordinarily humbling experience. When you speak to people who have been enslaved, or you see people who just, want food on their children's plates, all the things that everyone here is talking about, that's when the image and likeness, when you stare in another person's face, you see the image and likeness. And it certainly makes you look in the mirror in a very different way as well. But I mention that because I was the only Orthodox Christian on the commission. The commission was established in 1998, and I served from 2004 to 2012. There hasn't been another Orthodox commissioner. And one of the things that I felt was a special kind of mindfulness to serve in a way that made it clear that my own Orthodox faith and commitments were completely compatible with the mission of that agency, which was to look around the world at violations of international religious freedom and try to ameliorate those according to universal standards of human rights. I don't think there's any incompatibility between those two things, but one of the things I noticed was that most people, my fellow commissioners, didn't know a lot about Orthodoxy. It was an opportunity to just share. And also when we went into countries that didn't have the historic footprint of Orthodoxy, it became quite challenging to engage with Orthodox Christians on the ground. They were not used to engaging with certainly U.S. government agencies, but more generally, they were not used to having a dialogue, a conversation outside of their own communities. And I think that's one of the big challenges facing Orthodox Christians. It's not only the work, taking the light from under the bushel, but it's ourselves learning how to live in a pluralist world. Yesterday I was struck over and over again about the comments about ecclesiology and sociology. And I was thinking, and you've all mentioned it, we're talking about humanitarian relief, and what's happening here, we're preparing for festival season in Orthodox churches. And I understand why we have festivals. That's a whole discussion in of itself. But if we were to take the 3 points that Metropolitan Makarios mentioned yesterday, you're the image of God, I love you, and therefore you're my brother and sister. I added sister. You're my brother and sister. And we were to stamp those on our festival t-shirts, I think we would be living our ecclesiology in a way that doesn't really come to mind when we think about festivals. So to go from high politics to church festivals, I guess my response to you is that we need to learn to think far more systematically as Orthodox Christians about how it is that we share what Orthodoxy is, and therefore the kinds of work that we can do in combination with others as well as on our own. And I think that systematic thought and the strategic planning that goes along with that, I think is where we can grow a lot.
Could I ask a question yet? My question is for Father Theodore. We talk about a lack of resources, but what we also know is that in a lot of cases there's too many resources chasing too little creativity about what to do with them. You mentioned the money that was spent wrongly in Georgia that could have gone somewhere else. There's this famous book called Travesty in Haiti by Timothy Schwartz. He just goes through all the aid organizations in Haiti and exactly what is going wrong. It's just mind-boggling, and people like Paul Farmer have said this book is exactly accurate. He's not a lone voice. We know the famous World Bank study that was done in the early 90s after the Soviets fell. They could find no correlation between World Bank development aid and economic development in any country over 50 years. They couldn't even define development. When they went to do the study, they had to cobble together a definition. In your experience in Georgia, what percentage of the aid that's spent is either corrupting or corrupt or useless or just completely misconceived? Because we're telling people to open their hearts, and they do, and their wallets, and if then that money is wasted, this is a powerfully corrosive effect on everything else that you are saying here about what we should be doing. Thank you.
Can we turn the camera off? The reality is, when I first arrived in Georgia, it was ranked in the top 5 most corrupt countries in the world. And the United States has spent enormous amounts of money in Georgia, and very little of it reaches the streets. It's channeled into the pockets of just a few that are in control. With humanitarian aid, my experience was limited, so I wouldn't like to speak directly to that. Just before the conference, I sent an article to Father Nathaniel out of Foreign Policy, and it really struck me because it was just before this conference, and it spoke about the amount of money that the United States has spent on Afghanistan alone, rebuilding it. We spent more in Afghanistan than we spent rebuilding Europe after World War II. You know, it's a tremendous amount of money, and it's not reaching the people who need it. I'm really concerned about many of my Georgian friends. In the wake of the invasion from August 2008, the country's still not recovered. This was just a preview of what happened in Ukraine last year. And the Russian Federation was able to divide the country in half. You know, they're still sitting in South Ossetia and Abkhazia. The waste is tremendous. And, you know, I'm not in a position to know how to change that or turn it around. I think in conjunction with some of the other questions, what I'd like to say is that from our perspective as Orthodox Christians, we have to be a witness with whatever resources we have at the moment. You know, it's incumbent upon each of us. Yes, we need to develop organizations and coalitions where we can represent ourselves on a much larger basis. We really need to do that. But for me, you know, I work in the trenches. That's where I'm best. And I just give with, you know, with what I have. Like Pascali said, that, you know, when I see someone in trouble, I intuitively know what needs to be done. You know, if nothing more than just to sit and hold their hand, you know, and to be with them and to weep with them. So the difficulty about corruption, you know, in that part of the world, we have it here in America too. We're just more sophisticated about it. You know, we're better at covering it up, or, you know, or a little sleight of hand. So,
is the tape off? Okay. Well, I was just going to say, I am not an expert on this at all, but I know what I hear sometimes from my peacemakers, and I can tell you that from my peacemakers in Afghanistan, what I heard was tremendous fear and concern about the loss of resources coming into the country because they saw a difference as a result of them. So I can't speak to, you know, to the corruption and to the issues of the layers that it goes through before it gets to the people, but some of it has reached the people on the ground and made a difference as well.
One thing I would like to say, in defense of the humanitarian aid organizations in Georgia, I can guarantee you they're extremely sincere. They're trying very, very hard. And they're accountable for the resources they have available to them. We have a problem in comparing for-profit organizations and nonprofit organizations in America. We want nonprofit organizations to be efficient, yet we don't produce any product. The only source of income comes from donations. It comes from people who want to work alongside of us, and they join their resources with ours. So we're using a standard of measure that doesn't fit both worlds. And so I think we need to be careful when we really insist that nonprofit organizations be efficient. Well, we're very efficient. We're anemic. You know, there's not enough resources. We're squeezing everything we can out of it. You know, but we have to be careful about holding these nonprofit organizations and humanitarian aid organizations to the same standard that we would a for-profit corporation.
But I'm not doing that. I'm just asking your question, which is World Vision could have helped and existed
and my apologies to my friends at World Vision who are watching. But I actually brought this directly to the national director as soon as I found out about it. I said, you know, I facilitated this meeting. I helped her to meet Mother Mariam. And you took the intelligence and you created your own organization, and he couldn't see what I was talking about. You know, he saw that they had actually done a good work. And that, you know, as far as he was concerned with the papers, with the numbers, with the, you know, everything was just fine. And he didn't see where my problem was. So once again, we're speaking about Eastern and Western organizations, and we're talking different languages.
But Tim, I think that's the importance of multilateral aid. You know, I mean, there are a lot of organizations that gives us as donors or as implementers the choice, the freedom to choose between effective versus non-effective. I mean, there's always going to be corruption. There's always going to be loss of resources and funds. But that's the importance of the third sector, you know, nonprofit organizations or civil society. And multilateral aid, again, it's a big debate whether you go with for-profit organization or nonprofit organizations, but multilateral aid has been proven to be successful in many cases over bilateral aid. And, you know, the option is donors and contributors and people who work is to, you know, try and work effectively and choose effectively and look at lessons learned and failures and successes and see who really is making a difference.
I think we have time for one more question. Oh, one more. Oh.
This gentleman
Follow
has
up
been
and then
asking
one
more-
more question.
Waiting for a moment. Yes?
And it's in alignment with some of the things we've been saying for Ms. Dubinsky, doctor. We could be a doctor. My question is, and this is always a struggle between the donors and the receivers, is the donors want to bring in projects with their name on it. That's why they wear, you know, things across their jackets, their shirts and everything. They want the donors to know, I was here giving the medicine to someone. But my question for you with your peacemaking program is, you said that one of the qualifications is that these people are unknown. If they were unknown, how did you find them, first of all? But secondly, I've been in northern Syria and Iraq and the Bekaa Valley, and the people that are there don't want you to know they're there, because once you tell them who they are and put them on a website, they're now targets of the regime. And I mean, a friend of mine was beheaded, Peter Kassig, he was carrying my medicine, and when it was put on the news that this was happening, he became a high-stakes target. So how do you balance that with letting the world know about these people, but they want to lay low? We were at a Syrian, it's called New Day Syria group fundraiser, and they smuggled out a woman who was doing this on the ground, and she said, I can't go back to Syria, or there's certain parts I can't go back because you have made me so famous. So how do you as an organization let people know that they're there, but they need to remain anonymous in a sense?
Thank you. We work with the peacemakers. We want them to be known, but if their life or their freedom is going to be at risk, or we're going to put their work at risk, and they let us know that, they're not. So one of our peacemakers who had publicly worked with us was in the Near East. I'm not going to name the country. And a fatwa was put on his head because the name of our organization, Tannenbaum, is associated as a Jewish name, even though we are secular and non-sectarian, and it's really to continue the legacy of a great human rights activist, Rabbi Mark Tannenbaum. But so when he let us know about the fatwa, there was a question whether he would come to our next working retreat. And we wanted him to come, and he wanted to come because it's a place of also, it is a retreat as well as a time of work, and it's a time of community, and it's a time when these individuals who very often truly are very alone, not all of them live in a community, and he didn't come together. And so he came, and we did not list him in the final report. We did not take a picture of him when we took the group picture. When we did public events, he did not speak, and we did not publicize him. And we have right now something that our peacemakers have created, which is going to go live, and I hope you'll all sign it and share it. It's a statement on extremism and that there is another way. And not all of our peacemakers have signed on. Some because of who they're associated with in this moment, they can't. Some because they can't be associated with us in the moment. But it was thoroughly debated by them, and we're waiting to disseminate it for a time when we will have some resources to go with it, because we think that'll make it more meaningful and perhaps get more traction. And the idea is to shine light on the voices of light, if you will. But that is something we address. In terms of their case studies, so far no one has asked us not to do a case study. If they did, we probably wouldn't do it. We might document their work and keep it in a private archive for future researchers at another time, because there's still learning to be done from them. And the goal is to acquire and accumulate the learning and to share what we can. I hope that answers your question.
Since Father Nathaniel began the discussion this morning with reference to the parable of the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan, my first reaction was to remind him that the two people who passed by were religious leaders. And the theme of religious leaders led to the issue that you raised, Elizabeth, about when we speak religious leaders, we forget the place of women in the church. And I would raise two things, and then I'll conclude by saying something. The two things that the church needs to pay special attention to is not only the wonderful things that have been spoken about here, the last three, and now the fourth session in the afternoon, wonderful presentations, but the issue of the state of women in the church and racism, which is very alive within people who claim to be Orthodox, or at least use the camouflage of orthodoxy. With respect to religious leaders, you have the opportunity to have a visionary leader, an enlightened leader. And we had examples presented to us yesterday by speakers, but by all of you who have given us talks this morning, of people who understand the demands of the gospel and respond to them. The tragedy in the church is that we have the unenlightened leaders. And let me give you a couple of examples. Yesterday, we raised the wonderful example of Archbishop Iakovos taking part in the walk on Selma. We had the living example yesterday of Metropolitan speaking in Cairo and being a bridge builder. Many years ago, I heard a hierarch in Greece saying to his clergy about a gathering of Jehovah's Witnesses in a particular village. And he inspired his clergy to take the villagers from the churches to go to these gatherings and to bully the Jehovah's Witnesses and urge them to throw tomatoes at them as they would be marching to their place of meeting. The unenlightened leader, the non-leader. So the church is served well by enlightened leadership, whether it's a bishop or a priest or a lay leader. And you have given us examples of this important aspect of the church. And I hope in some way that our theological schools and seminaries throughout the world speak to this issue of the inspired leader who knows the gospel, who puts the gospel into effect. For example, the issue of fasting, which may become an issue at the next synod, the Great and Holy Synod, with the traditional churches insisting not only on the institution of fasting, but making it even more severe and more strict, failing to read Isaiah and Isaiah's concept of fasting, which is not simply to speak about food, but to speak to all the things that you have been talking about. So inspired leadership is essential to the church.
Well,
with the mic now. Thank you to everyone. I think that brings to a natural conclusion our morning session. As with yesterday's sessions, this has been just wonderfully enlivening.